It's
The National Association of Realtors.
Oh, well, yeah, but it's just like, it's nice that they listen.
easy, nice.
We're gonna be doing presidential agreement part 2. And what-
They also don't have to be part of, the NAR, you don't want to be in
Washington,
Washington.
they are not bothered by now in Washington.
They're not required to if they don't want to be.
Oh, it's national.
Some of them are, you're not required to practice. So some of them don't even have to follow this.
So, all right, so
Crazy.
right now, the commission for the buyer is not discussed at the listing appointment. I mean, basically, it's not agreed to. We talked about the listing side commission, and we also talked about an unrepresented buyer. So what is an unrepresented buyer? That's someone who is not, obviously not represented, but what does that mean? It means that they don't have an agent and are not going to have an agent. So they're actually going to be signing a non-agency agreement. If you have a buyer, like let's say an attorney walks into your listing and they say, I'm going to be representing myself. We are allowed to give them a blank offer. We can print a blank RPA. We can give them a residential purchase agreement not filled out. We are allowed to fill out our name and our company as the listing agent.
But as a buyer, he has to put down the name of his agent's company.
He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to?
We are allowed to give them a blank purchase agreement.
Okay.
And we are allowed to put in the address and us as the listing agent.
Oh,
Now, what's going to happen is they're going to give back to you a horribly filled out purchase agreement. That's
right, you are sure.
And then,
You're gonna have to work.
and then we're going to give a counter offer with a filled out purchase agreement
Right,
that benefits the seller, obviously,
right.
right? But that's how it's done. Because they're unrepresented.
You don't sign buyer's agreement with them?
They're going to give us a purchase agreement that's horrible.
Yeah, and
And
then,
then we're going to give a counter offer and attach a new purchase agreement with all the terms that we want.
oh, just, oh,
Now they can go through the new purchase agreement that we've now filled out. Right, for the benefit of our seller, and then they can push back on anything that they don't agree with.
you can give them the disclosure and everything?
Sure.
What is everything?
But that, now, in our listing agreement, we have 2 areas of commission. Commission for the listing agent
Right.
and extra commission for the listing agent. If a buyer comes in unrepresented,
Okay.
right? But that's what an unrepresented buyer is. They don't have any. So we're going to be doing extra work, and that's why we can ask for more money from the seller.
Okay.
All right. So this is part 2 of the RPA. Share that with you guys. Okay. This RPA is current as of 2 days ago. So here we stop at paragraph 7. So I'm going to do a quick recap. We're just going to zoom through it because I don't want to start in the middle. Do a quick recap. Nothing wrong with that. So agency disclosure is always going to be the first document we give to a buyer or seller. Just tells them what an agent is. We're talking about brokerages and agents. We represent sellers. We represent buyers. We also represent buyers and sellers. There are some brokerages, by the way, that will only represent one side. Some people advertise like that. But we do represent both buyers and sellers in this brokerage. Our responsibility to everybody is fair and honest dealing. Okay, so this is the civil code that just says we need to give an agency disclosure and what needs to be done on it. All right, here's the page 1 of the purchase agreement. Today's date will go here. This will be the date that this purchase agreement is referenced by. When we're talking about the purchase agreement dated, this date right here, not the date it was signed. Okay, buyer's name will go there, property information, the names of brokerages will go here. You'll get this information out of the MLS. We're going to put our purchase price, check this box if it's all cash. How long an escrow do we need? You're going to verify with the lender how long an escrow they want, they can do, how quick an escrow they can do. I like to shorten this, you know, I like to set my offer apart. I talked about that yesterday. Instead of putting 30 days, 45 days, I put C3R, and I'll just say close of escrow to be 30 days or less. We'll put our deposit, which is gonna be 3%. And then that's due within 3 business days after acceptance. So today is Thursday. If you had an acceptance today, the 3% deposit would be due Friday, Monday, Tuesday. So it would be due Tuesday. Now, this has to be wire transfer. Tell your client that if it's due Tuesday, they better get their wire out by like 11 a.m. because there's going to be a cutoff time, right? So it's not like they have until the end of the day. It has to be done by Tuesday morning at the latest. Just for simplicity, I put the numbers here, it's $1 million purchase price. The buyer's putting 20% down, they're borrowing 80%. So this information is probably going to come to you on a pre-approval letter, what they're pre-approved for. They'll be pre-approved for $1 million purchase, $800,000 loan. You're going to get from the lender how long an escrow they can do, how fast they can move, what the rate is, and how many points are on the loan. What is a point? A point is 1%. 1 point is 1%. So in this case, if this buyer was getting a 1 point loan, that $800,000 loan is costing them $8,000. Okay. You know, you see no points, you know, whatever the loan is.
Oh, random questions.
Yes.
In regards to the loan portion, fit that as accurate as possible. What's the reason for that? Because I've done it before where the loan isn't even close to what that is, but they still get the buyer, the seller still gets their money every month.
To have this is because the loan is a contingency. So in order to back out on the loan contingency, if you were going to use the loan as your excuse for backing out, there's going to have to be a letter that comes from the lender saying we could not issue your loan based on this.
Because they can do it at a higher rate, something else, but it's going to.
Right. So I've seen agents write in here, they'll give a counter offer or something. It'll say best prevailing rate. So
That makes sense.
it puts the buyer in a position where they may not be able to use the loan as a contingency.
Okay.
Right? Because let's say interest rate spikes to 8.5%. If you don't fill this out, let's say interest rates for whatever reason go up 1 full percent tomorrow, and that they just got priced out of their loan, they can't do it anymore. But because you didn't fill this out, they can't use the loan because I'll give them a 20% loan.
Got it. Right.
Right? I'll go borrow it for 12 and give them for 20.
Protects the buyer.
It protects the buyer.
You have someone doing like a 3% instead of a 20%, does that change their deposit amount at all? Or are they still kind of putting?
Okay, so if someone,
Right.
right, so what normally, normally, someone who's putting less than 20% down,
Yeah,
they're gonna have to pay PMI, private mortgage insurance.
yeah,
So it's gonna cost them more. That's really all there is to it.
but it's not changing their
Deposit.
deposit. That's
So,
what I mean.
yeah, I always want to get 3% deposit
Yeah.
to escrow. Right, so if somebody's getting it, say an FHA loan,
Yeah.
and it's a 3.5% down payment,
Yeah,
they're borrowing 97.5%.
yeah, because I'm just thinking about people, it's like it's a cost thing, that's why I'm thinking about the
Yeah.
deposit, if they're already having to do a 3% loan, if
So-
they can't afford that deposit.
Right, so if they don't have the 3% deposit, what I'm gonna do. No, they don't have the deposit, it's an issue, because if they don't have the deposit, they could back out, they can only lose what's the deposit is.
Yeah,
That's-
I just meant like, could you offer like a lower
No,
percentage, or would you not recommend?
You can,
that?
so what I've seen is investors, they'll put here 5,000, 10,000, they'll write an offer like that. And that's the maximum they can lose. You can't lose more than the deposit you paid.
3% is not mandatory?
No.
I'm just thinking about people who are struggling.
No,
Can't lose, it's not mandatory.
it's not, but
You can't lose more than the deposit actually paid if the liquidated damages is an issue.
But here on the car, it said 3%. Can you change it?
You can put whatever you want.
Really?
I've had,
Never had.
higher, put like 5 or 10 down
Yeah,
way back, and then they'll counter and say, no, we need 15,000 down when it wasn't, competitive. And then we go ahead and accept that. So you can,
yeah. I
give
was
it,
thinking about if someone's already
As long as
going
we're
to
talking about
3%.
Okay, so,
I want to know before you delete.
all right, so let's talk about liquidated damages real quick. So I'm just gonna zoom real quick, because we're talking about the deposit. Okay, let's just go to paragraph 27.
28.
Yeah. So, here we go, paragraph 26. Liquidated damages. Right, it's really hard to say what damages are in real estate, right? It's hard to say. What are damages in real estate? So we have this term called liquidated damages, and it's basically a pre-agreed amount of damages. Because it's really hard to talk about what the damages are. So let's just pre-agree what the damages will be in advance. If you don't perform as the buyer. All right, so liquidated damages. By initialing in the space below, you are agreeing to liquidated damages. If buyer fails to complete this purchase because of buyer's default, that means that the buyer did their inspections, removed their loan contingency, removed their inspection contingency, removed their appraisal contingency, everything. They have removed all contingencies. Okay. Now they're going to default. They're not going to go through with the deal. They lost their money in Vegas. Okay. They had a whatever. All right. Seller shall retain as liquidated damages the deposit actually paid. So if you only have $5,000 as a deposit, that's the maximum the seller is going to be able to keep. That's why, as a listing agent, I always want to respond on a counter offer, deposit to be 3% of purchase price. Okay. All right. So that's, as a listing agent, I always want 3%.
Because
If the property is a dwelling no more than 4 units, one of which buyer intends to occupy. So this only applies to primary residence or right, or primary and secondary residence, basically. Then the amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. That caps it at 3%. Any excess shall be returned to buyer. If you have a buyer that puts 5% in escrow as a deposit, 5%, but this is initial, technically the seller can only keep 3% of it and 2% will have to get returned to them if they don't do the deal. Yeah.
If you're a buyer agent, you want them to look a little stronger and maybe put down, like you said, 5%.
No,
no,
there's no reason to do it. So you can.
It wouldn't do anything though. You're saying.
Yeah. I mean, look, it might look stronger. But now don't forget, whatever your buyer puts into escrow, the only way to get that money out is by the seller also signing. Because escrow can't do anything without both buyer and seller signing. So if your buyer decides to put their entire purchase money into escrow, right, just to look strong, the only way they're going to get that money back out is if the seller agrees to it.
I have lawsuit, potentially.
I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
that's, just keep in mind, escrow can't do anything without the buyer and seller agreeing to it. So you will have a buyer in your future tell you, hey, I'm just going to put all my money in. Don't let them do it. I mean, it's not that you're going to let them do anything. Recommend them not to do it, and why? Because if we're in a situation, the seller can play games and not be in such a hurry to sign, and may be difficult to get your money back out. We'll get it eventually, but all right, they're going to cause problems.
But if you have a seller that is initialing this, but they're also agreeing to your buyer only depositing like $5,000 or $10,000, doesn't this kind of, what is that 3%? It doesn't really apply.
Right, it doesn't apply
They
because
would just get what that is.
it's the deposit actually paid, not to exceed 3%.
Oh, okay,
Liquidated damages, the deposit seller shall retain the deposit actually paid. Not to be more than 3%. Any excess shall be returned to buyer. Release of funds will require mutual signed release instructions from both the buyer and the seller, judicial decision or arbitration award. Now we're talking about an increased deposit. So what's an increased deposit? So let's say you write an offer and you say the buyer is going to put in 3%. And then upon contingency removal, we'll put in another 3% or 5%, right? To make your offer stronger, it might appear stronger. It says at the time of any increased deposit, the buyer and seller shall sign a separate liquidated damages provision incorporating the increased deposit as liquidated damages. So you can do that too, so let's just say your buyer initials this. Let's just say it's not agreed to. It's not agreed to. Okay. This definitely protects your buyer. So what happens if your buyer writes an offer for $1 million and they remove contingencies? This is not part of the contract now. No, it wasn't initial. They're in a deal for $1 million and something happens in the world. No one's buying property. They get scared and they decide, you know what? We're going to back out. We're not going to complete our purchase right now. We think prices are going to plummet or, fine. They back out. Now the seller puts the property back on the market and sells it for $800,000 instead of $1 million. Seller now has $200,000 in damages that they can go after the buyer, right? Because they were in escrow for $1 million. That deal didn't go through. Now they resold for $800,000 right away. They now have $200,000 in damages. They will sue the previous buyer for $200,000. So this will limit their downside to 3%. That's good. All right. Then we have another paragraph here that requires initialing, which is arbitration. The people that are going to push back on arbitration are attorneys. I think attorneys are probably taught in law school. I didn't go to law school. They're probably taught never initial arbitration. I think. I don't know.
My mom.
Yeah, that's your point. So arbitration is binding. So that's the difference between mediation and arbitration. There is a mediation requirement in this contract. If the buyer and seller have a dispute, they are agreeing to go to mediation. And mediation is not binding. We're just going to try to work it out. All right. Now, if arbitration is initialed by both parties, that means that the parties agree that any dispute which is not settled through mediation shall be decided by neutral binding arbitration, which arbitration is usually like a retired judge or an attorney who does real estate law. The buyer and seller both need to agree who the arbitrator is going to be, but they're also agreeing up front that that's going to be a binding decision. Whatever the arbitrator decides is going to be binding. As a seller, I prefer arbitration personally as a seller because I don't want my property tied up for years and years and years in court. It could be extension, this extension, that, and then I can't sell my asset. Because there's a dispute in court. I can't go sell it to another buyer. I have to deal with this lawsuit from this buyer. And as a seller, I'm stuck. I'm for could be many, many years. So as a seller, I think arbitration is important. I had a attorney client when I started real estate tell me, I don't want an initial arbitration. And who am I to argue? A brand new agent, this attorney, okay, guy. So I go back to my office manager and I said, my client doesn't want an initial arbitration. And my office manager said to me, okay, tell your client that, because my client's excuse was, I can always agree to this in the future. I don't want to agree to it right now. I can always agree to arbitration in the future. That was his response. So my office manager said, yes, he can agree to it in the future, but the other party might not. Right? Because it requires both parties to agree. So yeah, he might think that he can just decide, let's go to arbitration in the future, but the other party might want a court trial. Right?
The other way you can think about it is, if they are a lawyer, how many cases are you doing that are actually just settling versus?
Oh, everything's settled. Everything's settled.
You gotta think, if you think about it like that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you rather be settling in your own?
I as a seller, I don't want to tie up my property in court for years.
But like, if you bring it to them like that, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yes, I bring it to them. So say
Say like, how many cases have you done where you've gone to court and what was that process like versus the case
yeah.
you settled, and how much smoother was that?
Are you dragging out these cases, right? Billing your hours?
was on a case for 6 years because they did not want to settle. That's what can happen.
Yeah. All right, so going back to. Going back to my additional terms. So this is all the way back on page 3. So remember, on the top of page 1, I had a term here for how long escrow is gonna be. So on the very first page of the purchase contract, it says closing escrow. And I wrote on there C3R.
Yeah,
So CR is additional terms. Down on additional terms, I wrote close of escrow to be 30 days after acceptance. You have to have a finite date to have a contract. Close of escrow to be 30 days or sooner by mutual agreement. Buyer is willing to close escrow, lender is able. That will set your offer apart from the other 30-day escrow buyers. All right, now, I also included an additional term here. Seller agrees to initial paragraphs 26 and 28, liquidated damages and arbitration. Why do I put that here? Because your buyer is gonna sign this RPA. And they're going to initial paragraphs 26 and 28. Then you, as the buyer's agent, are gonna send this to the listing agent. The seller can accept your offer and not initial those paragraphs. Right? Think about it. Very possible. The seller accepts your offer and doesn't initial those 2 paragraphs. Now you have an accepted offer and those 2 paragraphs don't apply. So you need to put this in here. Seller agrees to initial 26, 28. Now, as a listing agent, what I'm supposed to do when I receive an offer is I'm supposed to take this to my seller and say, do you want to accept this offer? Okay. My seller is either going to say, there's 3 things that can happen. My seller can say, I'm not responding, or will accept, or will counter. Those are the 3 things, right? No response, reject, basically, counter or accept. All right. If we are going to counter, so you're the buyer's agent, you're sending your offer to me, the listing agent. I'm taking this offer to my seller and saying, here's this offer. What do you want to do, seller? They're gonna say, let's counter price. I want, instead of $1 million, I want 1,050,000. Okay. Now, what's gonna happen is I should, as the listing agent, have my seller initial every single page of this offer. Okay, my seller is going to initial every page and they're gonna sign this offer. Here's the acceptance paragraph. Seller warrants that seller is the owner of the property or has the authority to execute contract this agreement. Seller accepts the above offer and agrees to sell the property on the above terms and conditions. Seller has read and acknowledges everything. Okay. Seller's acceptance is subject to the attached counter offer. Okay. So basically what's happening here is there's 200 terms in this offer, right? There are 200 terms. So I'm gonna check the box here and it's gonna say seller counter offer. So the seller is accepting this above offer subject to this counter offer. And then I'm attaching the counter offer. Okay, and I'm only countering the terms that I'm changing. So I'm gonna counter purchase price to be this. Deposit to be 3% of purchase price. Now, when I send this back to you as the buyer's agent, you're gonna get a fully executed offer with a counter offer. You're gonna immediately see whether the seller initial paragraphs 26, 28. Right, you're gonna see it. Now, what if I get an offer from everybody here? 10 offers. I have 10 offers now as a listing agent. I'm not gonna have my seller sign 10 offers plus 10 counter offers, right? I'm only gonna have my seller sign a 1-page counter offer to everybody. I'm not gonna have them sign a 30-page offer for 10 people. That's crazy. So I'm only gonna send you a counteroffer. Now, how do you know on my counteroffer if paragraph 26 and 28 is included? That if the seller agreed to initial them, right? So on my counteroffer, it's gonna say purchase price to be 1,050,000, deposit to be 3% of purchase price. And then my next term is liquidated damages and arbitration are a part of this agreement. So that's my counteroffer. If you as a buyer's agent send an offer and you only get a one-page counteroffer and it doesn't talk about liquidated damages and arbitration, they've automatically accepted it if you wrote it into those additional terms. Remember, you wrote in your offer that the seller agrees to initial. If they didn't counter, they agreed to it. Right? Because it didn't appear on a counter. So they agreed to it. If you forgot to include that in your additional terms, when you give the buyer counteroffer, that's where you're gonna put it again, because you forgot to put it on your RPA. So then you just put liquidated damage and arbitration. Seller agrees to initial. Someplace it needs to say seller agrees to initial if you don't have them initial. All right, so I'm just putting that out there. I'm trying to protect your clients. We are not supposed to give advice to our clients of what we think they should do as far as initialing those two paragraphs, but we are explaining the situations to them. So, right, so I'm just like I explained to you just now, you explained to your client, if you don't initial this paragraph as a buyer, you could be liable for more than 3% of your deposit. Right? If you don't, and for a seller, if you don't initial the arbitration, you could be tying your property up in court. Right? So just explaining those situations. So. Okay, so. So again, we're going to be asking the seller to pay our commission as the buyer's agent. So we already have a signed buyer rep agreement from our advice for say whatever it is, 2.5%. We're checking this box, and that's going to pull up an additional form called the SPV. And we're going to ask the seller to pay the buyer's obligation. The buyer's going to ask the seller to pay their obligation for their commission. Don't forget to check that box. Unless you listen. All right, we are shortening our timelines. You only need to shorten your timelines if you're competing with another buyer. If you're not competing with another buyer, there's no reason to do it. Unless the seller just doesn't want to give you that much time, and that's a different story. But everything here is negotiable. So we're going to shorten our investigation. So you don't need 17 days to investigate a property. You can get all your inspectors done in a matter of days. Insurance, that's the only one right now that could take a lot of time, is the insurance part. Things are being delayed because of insurance claim. Okay, let's go through. And then we stopped at paragraph 7 yesterday. Include all of your, whatever's included, that's gonna go there. We're gonna ask the seller to pay for a natural hazard report. Okay. If the property is in a fire zone, you'll ask the seller to pay for that report. Ask the seller to pay for a city report. There are some cities that require a certain report to be signed off by both buyer and seller. Seller will pay for retrofitting. Retrofitting means smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, water heater strapping, and then these other checkboxes here have to do with low flow toilets, emergency earthquake gas shutoff valves, those kind of things. Okay, escrow. Both buyer and seller are gonna hopefully pay the same low rate. Ask for our escrow, ask for our title company, seller to pay for title. The seller will also customarily here in Southern California pay for county and city transfer taxes. HOA transfer fees will ask the seller to pay for. We're gonna ask the seller to pay for a home warranty. The home warranty, don't be afraid to ask for this home warranty. Your deal is not gonna, there's no seller that's gonna say, I'm not selling my property because of this, the buyer wants a home. Don't worry about that. Ask for the home warranty. It's gonna cover all the appliances in the property, if there's an electric plumbing issue, pool equipment issue, if you added the to the feature. Don't be afraid to ask for that. Again, if you are related to the buyer, you need to disclose that, this place. If your buyer has a real estate license, you can disclose that, that's the place. Okay. If their tenant, if the property's tenant occupied, you'll check that box. You're gonna always go through these boxes just to see if anything applies to your particular situation. If the property's in a trust, this is probably the most common checkbox. If the property is owned in a trust, then you'll check that box. It'll add a trust advisory. All right. If an all cash offer is specified, no loans. This agreement is not contingent. Okay. The seller has permission to contact the buyer's lender. It's in the contract. Okay. So if you're a listing agent and someone gives you an offer and it comes with a review, you have permission to call the lender and check up and say, hey, I just got an offer from your client, so-and-so. They're gonna say, hey, how you doing? Great, how we looking? Great, I just want to verify that you've seen their credit, you've seen their income, you've seen their tax returns. How are we doing, right? So you have permission to contact the lender. All right, limits on credits. After your buyer does their inspections and they decide, you know what, we're not comfortable at the $1 million purchase price we originally offered because of these new issues that we found. We do want the seller to reduce the purchase price or give us credit or make repairs. If there's going to be a negotiation after inspections, we just want to make sure that if we're asking for money from the seller, that the lender is okay with the amount. So first thing to do is call the lender. Don't tell the lender anything except how much credit is allowable. How much is the maximum credit the seller can give the buyer on this particular loan? And it's going to be a different answer all the time. Every loan is different. And I'm saying that because you don't know where the lender is selling this loan. Where's the money coming from? So what happens with all of these loans that get made is they get resold. So they get bundled, and the bundles have criteria. So we don't know what bundle it's going and what the criteria is for that bundle of loan. Some loans say 3%. Some thing, and you don't know also how the things were calculated. Easiest thing, call the lender to say, what's the maximum credit that you'll allow for this loan? And that's it. If you're gonna ask for more than that, you can't ask for a credit, you're gonna have to ask for a price reduction. That's all I'm saying. Just if you don't do it that way, you will lose the money. That's what this contract says.
Either way, it's better to reduce the price because you save on taxes and you do it, repair yourself. I mean,
So everything has to be analyzed. Each deal's different.
you want to repair yourself.
It does help the buyer to get a little credit because it's less money they need to come out of their pocket up front.
Yeah.
So it does help them to get some credit for the closing costs. It does help. So you can combine some credit and some price reduction.
Right. Okay.
All right, so this is where we left off yesterday. Okay. So if the buyer intends to occupy as a primary, secondary residence, if that's their primary or secondary residence, the unit that the buyer intends to occupy shall be vacant at the time possession is delivered to the buyer. So this is saying, we're gonna get a vacant property. Okay. All right, and if it's tenant occupied, we're gonna include that tenant occupied property addendum. And on that addendum, you can check the box that the property is going to be delivered with a tenant or without a tenant. All right, conditions. This is an as-is purchase. The seller is selling the property as is, which means they need to maintain it as is. So the seller is responsible for making sure that the pool man is still coming, the gardener is still coming, right? They have to maintain it. The only thing they don't have to do is when they take all their art off the walls and take the nails out of the wall, they don't have to patch the holes. They don't have to do that. That's what that says. All right, if the seller is staying in the property after close of escrow, this is recommending that the buyer contact an attorney just to get some legal advice about allowing someone to stay. There is going to be risk for a buyer that allows the seller to stay in the property. Seller shall, let's see, provide keys, passwords, codes. Okay, so the seller does have to provide a key to every single lock on the property. If there's a gate on the property that the seller lost the key 10 years ago, they will have to hire a locksmith, change the lock, we have to do something, but they're gonna have to do something to give you an operating key to every lock. That is. By the way, appraisal and loan are separate. I didn't highlight anything here. There are two totally separate contingencies. So if you're contingent upon an appraisal, the property has to appraise. Let's talk real quick about appraisal. You're gonna have buyers that think that they stole a property. They're gonna think that they're paying 1.2 and it's worth 1.5. And they're expecting that appraisal to come in over 1.2, even though your contract price is 1.2, right? Because they think they stole it. Tell them upfront in advance before the appraisal even happens, expect your appraisal to come back at 1.2. The only thing the appraiser has to do is justify the purchase price. That's all they have to do. They're protecting the lender, justifying the purchase price. Most of the time, the appraisal will come back at the purchase contract price. Okay. Yeah,
Why would an appraisal will be more higher in a brand new developed renovated house? I have a house that I'm looking for now and the appraisal came, the agent told me the appraisal came 1.7. They're selling for 1.6 almost. Why would they do that?
why is there an appraisal?
Why? I don't know.
I'm just curious, why, if the property is not in escrow, why has there been an appraisal? Was it a previous appraisal? Maybe they had sold it for 1.7 and that buyer backed out. And it was appraised previously for 1.7.
It was a closing soon, it was a coming soon listing. I was the first agent that sold.
So I don't know, so my first question is, why do you have an appraisal?
I asked them to myself too, but why would they
Yeah,
have,
why would it? I don't know.
would they get it done for buyers to see?
So what are the reasons people get appraisals? They'll get appraisal when they're buying a property. Or they'll get an appraisal when maybe there's a dispute amongst some siblings, how much the property is worth, what should we listen for?
Investment property developers.
Yeah, I don't know, it's weird, it's weird. Another reason for an appraisal will be an inheritance. There needs to be a value put on a property by a certain date of death, I think, so, those are reasons for appraisal. Why do they have an appraisal? I'm just curious, so that's the question, so it's why do you have it, so, but the property appraised for 1.7. Okay, good.
Is it,
Next question an appraiser is gonna ask when you call to order an appraisal is what's the reason for the appraisal?
you say that if the seller stays after the close of escrow,
Yeah,
he has to give the key to
yes,
the owner.
correct.
So if he's a tenant, you can enter, I mean, how do you?
The owner is entitled to have keys of a property that they own,
Oh, and what, but they cannot enter into the property
not without notice.
without notice that, okay.
Yeah, but if you own,
You have to have
you're
each-
entitled to have keys.
Geez, okay,
Now, you can,
I mean,
now, there is a form. Don't forget, there's two forms. There's either 29 days or less or 30 days or more.
right, they said that,
If the seller is staying. There is a place on those forms that talks about when keys will be delivered at closing or at time of possession. So you can actually say to the seller, don't worry, I'm not asking you for the keys now.
right,
But I think you're entitled, by default, I think you're entitled to them. By default, if you don't check anything. Because I think the checkbox says keep the keys until move out.
oh, keep the gotcha,
Yeah. But if you're buying a property that has tenants, you definitely want those keys.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
All right, so but just know that the appraisal and the loan are two totally separate contingencies. So what that means is the appraiser comes and is supposed to turn around and give an appraisal report. If you remove that appraisal contingency, you can't use the appraisal contingency anymore, back out. If you remove the loan contingency, basically these paragraphs are just separating them. I don't know, it gets so involved in talking about the separation of these things. One, if no loan contingency is checked, obtaining a loan is specified as not a contingency. Buyer does not obtain, okay, fine. Appraisal. This is, I don't know why they get so involved in separating them, but just understand those are two totally separate things, the loan and the appraisal. All right, investigation of property. This agreement is contingent upon the buyer's acceptance of the condition and any other matter affecting the property. That's paragraph 12. Okay, insurance, again, that's a contingency. Title. Well, this is getting very involved. Yes, this agreement is contingent upon buyer's review of seller's documents. Title, the agreement is contingent upon buyer's ability to obtain a title policy. So the seller has to give a insured title to the buyer. Okay. All right. If the buyer does remove a contingency without first receiving all required information from the seller, the buyer is relinquishing any contractual rights that apply to that contingency. So this is saying, hey, contingencies are pretty serious. If you are removing a contingency, you're removing that contingency. It's not coming back, right? So just understand what you're doing when you sign that contingency removal form. Now, your buyers are going to be very, very nervous. Well, what's my risk? Tell your buyers you really don't have risk until you remove your contingency. Okay? As long as your contingencies are in place, you can get your money back, right? Don't worry. I'm going to tell you when you're going to have to start worrying. Not worry, but my goal is I'm going to help you inspect the property. And I want to remove your fear of what you're buying. And we do that by inspecting. Once all the inspections are done, you'll know what you're buying. And then you'll make the decision you want to move forward on. Right? So we do that through inspections. Okay. If the buyer does not remove a contingency within the time specified, seller, after first giving buyer a notice to perform, shall have the right to cancel. So the seller cannot cancel this agreement without first giving the notice to buyer to perform. So the buyer has 12, we put in here 12 days, or by default 17, to do our inspections. So I'm a seller. I say, yes, I accept your offer. I'm giving you 17 days to do everything you need to do. But on day 17, I need a decision because I'm not wasting any more time. Either take it or leave it, or I'm going to go on to another buyer. Right? Now, what happens on day 18, day 19, day 20? Can you still back out and get your money back? Yes, you can. I can't cancel the deal. If I, as the seller, want to cancel, I have to first give you a notice to buyer to perform. What is performance? Contingency removal. You didn't perform your part of the contract. Your part of the contract said you were going to remove your contingency. Contingencies in 17 days, and you didn't do it. Now I'm giving you, as the seller, I'm giving you a notice to buyer to perform. Now that will give you 2 days to perform, to remove your contingency. If you don't remove them by the end 11:59 p.m. on day 2, on day 3, now I can cancel as the seller. Now, it doesn't automatically cancel. It just gives me the right to cancel. So I have to first give you a notice to perform. You'll have 2 days to remove your contingency. On day 3, I now have the right to cancel as a seller. But yes.
So on day 18 is when you've noticed to perform. If you put 12 days in here, then on day 13 is when you can give the notice to perform. Or
I can actually
default to 17.
I can actually give the notice to perform 2 days prior to the expiration of the.
Yeah, before.
So if you put 12
If I
in,
put 12 days on day 10, I could,
17 doesn't even matter at this point. It doesn't default to 17. It's at 12.
if I changed to 12,
12, right, correct.
then I can give it on day 10.
Got it. Okay.
I can't give it any earlier than day 10. So on day 10, I can give a 2-day notice to perform.
And then,
And then on day 13, I could cancel.
Oh, well.
I have the right to. It doesn't mean it will, just means I have the right.
so that would be the date.
Because I gave it on day 10.
You do it 2 days before.
Day 10 gave them 2 days.
Oh, day 10, give them 2 days. Yeah.
Would
Or day
also
15.
day 12, which is the time. If I'm being really aggressive, why would I be so aggressive as a seller? Because I have a backup buyer willing to pay more money.
Yeah.
Buyers will drag their feet.
Yeah, and my seller is saying, get out of this deal. I want the more money. Now, as a listing agent, I know that anything can happen.
When did you get that more money backup deal?
Backup offer. We accepted an offer and another buyer came in even stronger after we accepted the offer. And they're like, we want this all cash, more money. And now my seller is saying, JJ, get me out of this deal. I want the more money. All right, so what am I doing as a listing agent now? I'm providing, the question is, does the new buyer for more money have any contingencies? That's really the question. Because I don't want to lose buyer number 1 and buyer number 2. If
Yeah.
I keep pressuring buyer number 1 and they leave, buyer number 2 is going to come in now. and they think they can start playing games now, right? So what I need to do is, if I'm gonna put pressure on buyer number one, I need buyer number two to remove all their contingencies even before they're in escrow. I
Oh,
want me to be giving them all the inspection receipts, number one,
and then you give it,
giving them the title, be giving them all the disclosures. And they're gonna have to remove all their contingencies. If they remove all contingencies, buyer number two, then I'm gonna give notice to perform to buyer number one,
oh, then after.
right?
Oh,
Because I need to protect my seller.
Yeah, drag it down for 30 seconds.
I don't want to lose both buyers.
yeah, yeah.
Today, when I accept the offer and seller today, when was the escrow opening?
Doesn't matter when escrow opens. If you accept an offer today, today's the date of acceptance. So all days are on for today. It's nothing to do with when escrow.
And today is the day also we start accepting backup offers?
You can accept, well, so once you have an acceptance, then you can only accept backup offers after that.
Is there a time frame for accepting backup offers?
So anytime, you can accept the backup offer anytime, day before close.
Do they always accept backup offers?
So that's up to your seller. Right? The seller is basically committing to the new buyer that if the first deal cancels, that the backup buyer is the new buyer. If the seller accepts a backup offer, that backup offer buyer is automatically the new buyer if the first one cancels. Right, so the seller is the one saying that they'll agree to that. Now, as a listing agent, I want to have a backup buyer. Because I want to tell my current buyer, don't play games. I have someone that's calling me every second, asking me how the escrow is going, because they're ready in the wings to buy them. And that's gonna make them negotiate software, right? They're not
You
gonna.
cannot tell to the first buyer that I have an offer which is much higher
Sure
than,
can. I can tell anything I want.
or you can give them the price?
I mean, I can tell them anything I want.
Oh,
Backup offer buyer. They put the backup offer to you, like as a seller, but they're also shopping around because
Sure they
they're
are.
not sure if escrow is gonna close with,
The buyer can cancel anytime they want.
they can cancel it.
Yep. It's only my seller who's obligated. All right, we'll keep going. Items included and excluded from sale. Okay, note to buyer and seller. Items listed as included or excluded in the MLS, flyers, marketing materials, or disclosures are not included in the price or excluded from the sale unless specifically are in paragraph 3P. In that area where it said what's included, what's excluded, remember that? This is saying that the judge is not going to care what's in the MLS, what's on any flyer or marketing material. The judge is only going to look at the contract. So this is what I was saying. So if the chandelier in the dining room belonged to someone's great grandmother and it was not excluded in this contract, no matter what it said in the MLS or flyer or marketing material, it's coming with the property. Okay, then don't get in trouble with your seller. If they told you to exclude something, make sure you remember to do it.
You're in trouble if you forgot to do that.
Yeah, right.
Then you're in trouble. Legally.
All right, items included in the sale.
JJ, hi.
Yes,
I have a little question. With some of the offers, like with the escrow package, I see that the the listing agent makes everyone sign the MLS listing and its details, like all detailed MLS. So all the information that was put in the beginning. What is the binding effect on that for each side?
have you seen it recently?
Yes, I did. With my final closed escrow, they made everybody sign, including me.
Okay. I think there are some terms in the, well, no, that's interesting. So, that's actually putting the agent in a dangerous position. 'Cause the
Which one,
agent-
listing or the buyer?
It's putting the listing agent in a dangerous position, I think.
Okay,
Because the listing agent has filled out the MLS listing and
mhm,
is gonna be responsible for everything they put on that MLS listing. So if you,
Exactly.
if you were to go to the office manager and the office manager will say, don't fill out anything on the MLS that you're not 100% sure about. If you're not sure what kind of water heater is on the property, don't check it, right? Because you're gonna be responsible for it.
Mhm.
Now, I think agents used to include the MLS printout into their offers because it showed the commission.
All right.
That's would be a huge reason to do it. So I think the buyer's agent was including that in their offer. Because it showed the commission. And when that was being initialed, it was being agreed, like they were just making sure that it was agreed to. I think they were just protecting their commission.
I get it.
What I
Okay.
think. But now there is a new term in the buyer, it's not a new term, there is a term in the buyer rep agreement that says that the parties need to know how much commissions were paid. In the beginning, so we're actually writing that into our offer. And then at closing, how much commissions were paid, so. You know, that's not really gonna be done on that form, I guess, because there's no commissions being advertised on that anymore.
So as a buyer's agent, is it okay if I sign something like that or initial something like that?
There's no liability to you as the buyer's agent.
Okay.
I mean, all the liabilities on the listing agent who created that listing input sheet.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Items included. What comes with a property? Fireplace inserts, gas logs, and grates. When you walk into a property and you see inside the fireplace gas logs on a grate, that looks like personal property because someone can take that and put it in their new fireplace when they move. It comes with the property. The gas logs, they come with the property. Okay, solar power systems come with the property. That means if there's a current lease on a solar, if it's not talked about in your offer, it comes with the property. The seller will have to pay off that entire lease at closing. Okay, so if you have a listing that has a solar lease, you better put in a counter offer. There is a current lease on solar panels and buyer will take over that lease. That's gonna have to be a term that you disclose. Okay, on a counter offer. Because according to this contract, solar system will come with the property. A seller will have to pay it off. All right. Built-in appliances and appliances for which special openings or encasements have been made. Okay. Window and door screens come with the property. I hope so. Awnings and shutters, okay. Window coverings. Now, this is something you guys got to pay attention to. Window coverings.
So you can't say,
This includes blinds, curtains, draperies, shutters, or any other material that covers the window. So you could have a property where there's these gorgeous sofas and a matching material window covering, drapery. And the seller thinks that they are taking them because they match their couch, they match the sofa. They're not. That comes with the property. So even the rods, right? It says
the rods, you can't,
window cover, yeah, those
yeah.
right, restoration hardware rods, those are coming with property. It includes blinds, curtains, drapery, shutters, and any other materials that cover any portion of the window, and any associated hardware and rods. Okay, attached floor coverings. I'm not sure what an attached floor covering is. I've always wondered that. What is?
Is there any, I'm sorry, it's that in the case that happened to me, if there is a very expensive on the outside in the yard, there is expensive chair seat, old fashioned, I mean, antique, that costs about $5,000-6,000. It come with the property or
It only depends if it's attached.
where the statues is attached.
Statues. Okay, let's look.
You see the statue?
Let's keep going.
It was
What's
here.
included? Attached floor coverings, television antennas, satellite dishes, air coolers and conditioners, pool and spa equipment,
Foolish boy, cool.
including cleaning equipment such as motorized automatic pool cleaners, pool heaters, pool nets, and pool covers. That means that that little robot that roams around the pool is coming with the property.
Hmm.
They're not taking that to their new,
That's it, yeah.
okay? Garage door openers.
Once you detached it before you listed it then?
Yeah, it would have to be detached
Away
The
and,
buyers came and saw it, or before acceptance.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, because, or it's gonna be excluded on the counter offer. But that's coming with the property.
It's interesting.
Garage door openers and remote controls. The mailbox, okay. In-ground landscaping. I sold a property. I had a buyer that we wrote an offer on a property. And after we had an accepted offer, the listing agent called me and said, oh, by the way, the plants in front of the property were planted. They came from Hawaii. They're gonna take them with them. I'm like, according to the contract, they come with the property. We better get the buyer's permission before you start digging those up. So, but just saying, it comes with property.
Yeah, how about the shrub? This is the
And
vase, some huge vases with the,
so before in our contract, where it said included,
including the shrub.
there's a checkbox for
No,
potted trees and shrubs, potted,
that include the pots and
you
everything.
need to check the box.
Right, yeah.
Check the box, there's a box for it. Okay, here, John, here we go. Water features and fountains. Okay, if you go in Beverly Hills on Cannon and you go to this massive backyard and there's a giant pool
Right,
and there's statues all along the side. I see the statues all along the side.
yeah,
And some of the statues are spitting water into the
yeah,
pool.
yes.
The ones that are spitting water, those are water features. So those are coming with the property. But the ones that are not spitting water are not coming with the property.
Oh, wow.
Even though it's attached. Yeah, I know what the guy was there.
I'm just saying, according to the contract, that's a water feature.
I have to check it now.
You have to check, yeah. Okay, water softeners and water purifiers, light bulbs, including smart bulbs. So you might have a seller that put all these special Wi-Fi light bulbs.
I'm not,
They're taking them to their new property. Technically, it comes with the property. It's right here, black and white.
on this station.
Okay, but it has to be there at the time of acceptance. All right. Okay, let's keep going.
Oh, yeah, hallelujah.
All right, items excluded. What does not come with the property? The following items are excluded. Flat screen TVs. Okay, so the flat screen TVs, they're attached, but they don't come with the property. Speakers and other items, if any such item is not itself attached to the property, even if a bracket or other mechanism attached to the component or item is attached to the property. That means if you know, I haven't seen this in many years, but some people have like these Bose speakers that are attached on a bracket. Those attached speakers on the bracket don't come with the property. If you see it, write it in as the buyer's agent. Just say speakers, right? Write it in, sound system. All right. Okay, prior to close of escrow, the seller shall deliver to the buyer a written statement of compliance. If seller is to pay for these items and does not fulfill, buyer incurs costs to comply, seller shall be responsible. So the seller, don't forget, has to have smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, right? The water heater strapping, that has to get done. So it is contractual who pays for it. Remember, we checked seller. But it says here, that it's gonna get paid for by the party specified, but if the buyer is supposed to pay, the buyer shall put extra money into escrow. And if nobody did it, the seller is gonna have to do it. The obligation falls on the seller. Those things have to happen. All right, re-inspection fees. If any repair is not completed within the time specified and the lender requires an additional inspection to be made, the seller shall be responsible for any corresponding re-inspection fee. If buyer incurs costs to comply with lender requirements concerning those items, the seller shall be responsible for those costs. This is a re-inspection fee. The seller is responsible to have all the appliances working, not working, but all the utilities on during inspections. They have to have the gas on, the water on, right? If the appraiser came and something wasn't on that they need for their appraisal, and now a second appraisal has to come back, and there's gonna be an additional charge, the seller is responsible for that. Because they should have had it on, and we'll get that. So, all right, seller shall deliver to the buyer. These are all the things that a seller has to deliver. The seller has to give a transfer disclosure statement, a natural hazard disclosure. They have to fill out a seller property questionnaire. If they are exempt, the property's in a trust, they've never lived there. They're gonna have to fill out something called an ESD, an exempt seller disclosure. If the property's in a fire zone, they have to give an FHDS, a fire hardening disclosure statement.
JJ, I'm saying if they live in the property, just,
If you,
and all of a sudden, well, they moved out within a month.
then
They,
every seller has to disclose what they know.
oh,
You have to disclose what you know. Even if you're exempt, but you know things about a property, you have to disclose.
yeah, oh, even if you,
Place it's gonna go is this ESD, exempt seller disclosure.
yeah, okay,
You're either filling out a TDS and an SPQ,
right,
which has a lot of questions,
yes, yes.
or you're filling out the exempt seller, one or the other.
Well, one of the, yeah,
Now, the listing agent is required to do an AVID.
yes.
Okay.
I mean,
An AVID is the agent visual inspection. So both agents are required to do it, but specifically, the seller's agent has to do it as part of the disclosures.
oh,
It has to get done. Okay, this is putting a lot of responsibility on the listing agent. Get that AVID done ASAP. All right. Now, what happens in the event a seller or the seller's agent becomes aware of an adverse condition materially affecting the property? Any material inaccuracy in a disclosure previously provided to the buyer. So what's gonna happen is the seller shall in writing promptly provide a subsequent or amended transfer disclosure statement, seller property questionnaire or other document in writing cover that item. But subsequent or amended disclosure should not be required for conditions material inaccuracy which buyer is otherwise aware. So, okay. What this is saying is if I become aware of something after I've given my disclosures, and I'm aware of a new thing, or I forgot to put something, I need to amend my disclosure and just send them an updated one. But if I gave my transfer disclosure statement and filled out a bunch of stuff, and now the buyer did an inspection, and now the seller, am now aware of new stuff, I don't have to give a new transfer disclosure statement, even though I know more about my own property now. Because it says I don't have to do that if the buyer is aware of it. So as long as the buyer is aware, that's fine. The agent visual inspection disclosure is my chance as an agent to write down things that should be disclosed. Maybe we're not on the transfer disclosure statement. It's my opportunity. I can add something. So if I know something about the property that wasn't disclosed, it's my opportunity to add it. I can do that because it gets signed by both parties. All right, the seller has to give a lead disclosure for properties built before 1978. All these different things. Okay, termination. All right, termination. If any disclosure specified in the above paragraphs is delivered to the buyer after the offer is signed, buyer shall have the right to terminate within 3 days or 5 days. So just keep in mind, if your buyer is given a new disclosure, a mandatory one of the ones that were named, then they automatically will have pretty much 5 days to approve it. Okay. If the property is a condominium with an HOA, then the buyer is entitled to copies of all HOA documents, right? That's going to include any kind of litigation that's against the HOA, a statement containing the location and talking about the parking and storage spaces. It's going to have copies of the most recent 12 months of HOA minutes, the names and the contact information of the HOA. They're going to have to talk about pet restrictions, smoking restrictions, and the seller is going to finalize and deliver all of those to the buyer and whatever's in their possession. The seller shall, as directed by escrow holder, deposit funds into escrow to cover that cost. So what's gonna happen is escrow is gonna be opened. And the listing agent is going to tell escrow, this is in an HOA, or obviously if it's in a condo, there's gonna be an HOA. The escrow company is going to call the HOA and say, I need an escrow package. How much does that cost? And the seller will have to pay for that. All right. If there is a solar power system, for properties with any solar panels or solar power system, seller shall, within the time specified, deliver to buyer all known information about the solar panels or solar system. Sellers should use this form called solar. So if you're a listing agent and you're getting an offer on a property that has solar, you're gonna give as one of your disclosures back a form called solar. Okay. All right, this is a new thing. It's brand new. Balconies, exterior stairways, and other elevated elements. For properties with any building containing 3 or more dwelling units with elevated balconies, there's a new form called a WBSA. It's the wooden balcony and stairs addendum. For anyone that lives in an apartment or a condo that has balconies, you're probably aware of balcony inspections. I just know if you live in a condo, for sure your balcony's been inspected, I would say.
Did you talk about defensible space? What is defensible space?
Defensible space.
Defensible space disclosure, and then what is that?
So what is defensible space? So this has to do with fire hazard area.
Oh,
If your property is in a fire hazard area, what usually happens is the fire department goes around to all the properties and they'll write something about the property.
oh,
Defensible space is an area around a property that gets cleared so fire can't cross it.
oh,
It protects, it's like a moat, but there's no water. It's just a dry area that there's nothing flammable. So that's defense, it's called defensible space, like
a different.
it also takes fire from spreading.
So seller is responsible to clarify all of this,
Yeah, the seller, the owner, the property owner is responsible for
but
that.
it has to be there.
The fire department is the one that's gonna come to the property and tell the seller what they need to do. And if the seller doesn't comply, the fire department will do it and bill them.
Oh, business.
All
It
right,
has to be in the high fire hazard.
if you're the agent on a condo that has balconies, right, your purchase agreement is for a condo. If that condo has more than 3 units or 3 balconies, then you're gonna have to add this disclosure WBSA. So it's a new disclosure. Okay. Without seller's prior written consent. Okay, you guys are representing your buyer. This is your offer now, right? You should know this just as a listing agent too. Without the seller's prior written consent, the buyer shall neither make nor cause to be made invasive or destructive buyer investigations. That means if you're doing inspections and there's a wet wall and your inspector says to you, I think there's mold behind this wall. The only way we'll know for sure is to punch a hole through it so I can stick my camera back there. You're not allowed to do that without the seller's permission. Without the seller's prior written consent, the buyer shall neither make nor cause to be made invasive or destructive buyer investigations. Or inspections by any government building or zoning inspector or government employee. I, as a buyer, am not allowed to call a government inspector and have them come to the property. So, an example that I give for this is you have a buyer that is in escrow on a house. The garage was illegally converted, right, into living space. And the buyer wants a garage. They want to turn it back into a garage. So they call the city and say, I'm aware of a property that was illegally converted. It's at this and this address. So all of a sudden there's a knock, knock, knock on the door. Can we come see your garage? And then they write a ticket and say this has to get corrected because the buyer is trying to get a free garage, right? No, the buyer is now liable for that because they're not allowed to call a government building or zoning inspector or government employee.
The buyer is not allowed to call.
They're not allowed. They're not allowed to cause problems for the seller.
Really? I mean,
If
So
your
this,
buyers thinks that they're gonna be clever and start causing problems while they're in escrow because they're gonna get a better deal or something's gonna, right? Or they're gonna make the seller do something that they should be doing. This is gonna protect the seller. The seller can go sue them.
before you go to escrow, but you can report that, no? If you see something,
There you go. And no, so this is protecting the seller. That the buyer is not gonna play games and start calling inspectors to come to the property.
But the city is gonna say, hey, your buyer called us.
So here's the danger where I see. A lot of times you're gonna be in escrow on an income property. Or a house, and there's gonna be unpermitted space. Right, and your buyer's like, why does the city say this is 1,200 feet and it's 2,500 feet? Right, and then your buyer goes to the city and says there's 2,500 feet here. This could become a problem. Could become, because the city may now say, well, we're gonna go look into that. So, it'd be an issue. This is the issue with unpermitted space.
Would you then suggest that during the inspection, seller should be there too? If, by the way, because buyer cannot cause any destructive investigation?
Buyer cannot cause any destructive investigations, yes.
Find out if there's any mold or not, if inspection guys are telling the buyer that we have to punch a hole,
Right, so.
should the seller be there?
In this case, I'm gonna have a conversation with the other agent, or I'm gonna say. My buyer wants to get a mold inspector in. And I'm gonna leave it to the mold inspector. The mold inspector might give a report. With worst case scenario. I don't know. I don't know. We need to alleviate the buyer. The buyer is the one that needs to be comfortable moving forward. Right? And if the buyer is only gonna be comfortable moving forward, if they're allowed to check behind a wall. Then it's up to the seller if they're gonna allow it or not.
Or they're just.
The seller is gonna say, no, you can't punch a hole in my wall. Do you want the property or not?
What happens at that point?
Then the buyer can back out and get their money
If they
back.
choose not to, and they move forward, and they find out there's something wrong,
Then it's on the buyer.
because they chose to move
They
forward.
chose to move forward, yeah.
Interesting. Second question, you have a listing and you have a certain part of the house, room or section that's unpermitted. What's the how do you resolve that?
So, my concern with unpermitted space is it's safe. I recently sold a property that nothing was permitted. It was a total flip with no permits. You're gonna find this all the time,
Absolutely.
in downtown area. You know, these companies come in and they flip a property in 90 days, less than 90 days. They have new floor, new wall, new, and they never pulled a permit, right? So permits are there to protect the buyer, the new buyer, or even a homeowner that does work on their property to make sure it's up to code. It's there to protect. So like in walls, when you run electrical wire, I know Beverly Hills has always had a code where any electrical wire inside a wall will be done inside conduit. So it's inside that metal ribbed pipe. So if someone drills a hole in a wall,
Like it's electric.
it's gonna hit the pipe
Yeah.
and stop instead of going into electrical wire and getting electrocuted. So, you know, the permit process is there to protect the homeowner. My concern was selling a property that nothing was done with permit was insurance. What if the property burns down because of something? Will the insurance company come back and say this was unpermitted? We're not covering your insurance. That's my concern. I was, you know, right? What if someone did a kitchen remodel and it wasn't permitted and the kitchen burns down the whole house? Will insurance say, no, we're not paying for that? So I called my farmer's agent and I said, do you insure unpermitted space? And his response was yes. Yeah, anything existing is insured.
So you sold it with everything unpermitted?
Yeah.
Okay, so second question to that. If it's a 3-bedroom, the fourth.
No, I'm just saying that was that particular house.
Correct, every situation is different.
Consult with your insurance agent, I mean, the disclaimer. So that my insurance agent told me, yeah, no problem,
This
insurance.
is a lot like a 3-bedroom is listed on MLS and then
Okay.
or 4-bedroom, and then you get there when it was not permitted. What
So oftentimes you'll,
they added to the square footage and all that.
yeah, oftentimes you'll see an extra bedroom that's not included in the public records. You
MLS.
you see the public record say 2-bedroom, and then you get there, it's 3-bedroom. So there's no requirement for a permit to add closet. Like technically a bedroom has to have a closet and a window. That's how you define a bedroom. It has a closet and a window. There are a lot of condominiums that have a giant den that if you add a closet, it would be a bedroom, that it's like a closed off den. And if you add a closet, it's a bedroom. So if someone goes to IKEA and buys one of those wardrobe closets and they drill it into the wall, it's technically a bedroom. And they can call it a bedroom, but it wouldn't be on public records.
The appraiser would appraise it as, if it's not
It would,
permit,
it would be, yeah, it would be
it would
better.
appraise as 3-bedroom.
I think so.
But basically the permits are just to protect the person that owns a place, to protect
Yes,
the safety and all that.
safety.
It doesn't affect the house value. If the home is 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, but it's actually permitted as 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, that doesn't mean the house is priced at 2-bedroom,
So
2-bathroom.
it's up to, so if I'm an agent comping the property, right? Everyone's comping the property. The appraiser's comping the property, the agent's comping the property. I need to know what similar properties are selling for. If they're calling it a 3-bedroom and it's only a 2-bedroom on the public records, I need to know why. So then I'm gonna ask the listing agent, why is this 2-bedroom on public records and it's a 3-bedroom? How did that happen?
They-
Right? So now I'm just doing my investigations now and, right? Am I comfortable calling it a 3-bedroom? Every property's different.
Would you try to get a better discount on this kind of?
I'm not sure that you can, like, you're gonna make your offer based upon it being a 3-bedroom.
That's good. It's at 3, it's still listed at 3 and 3, that's the value of it.
Yeah,
It's not permitted. The third one's not permitted.
okay, so that could affect the value. It could. Every property's different. I would have to see it, right? Every single property is different. So
But you're gonna mention 12E, JJ, I have a question, what is,
12E,
when he said buyer has to investigate, I mean,
no,
to,
this, you're talking about 12E has to do with
I mean, you,
protection for entry upon the property. So,
seller indemnity and seller protection.
okay, indemnity is an interesting word. So
Protecting the seller.
indemnify. Let's see, okay. Buyer shall keep the property free and clear of liens, repair all damage arising from buyer investigations. So the buyer is responsible from damage that their inspector does.
Oh,
Okay, and they're gonna hold the seller harmless from all liability. If the inspector that I bring to the property falls off his ladder
yeah.
and I'm the buyer's agent and I bring my inspector and the inspector falls off his ladder, it's my responsibility.
Oh,
Not, they can't sue the seller.
you can't rely on.
Right, so I need to make sure as the buyer that I am hiring an inspector that has insurance.
Where's the insurance?
Workers' compensation, liability, yeah,
That's when that,
right. Buyer shall carry or buyer shall require anyone acting on their behalf have workers' compensation, other applicable insurance, yes. Yeah, I have to keep the seller safe, yes, okay. There is a form called NNR. It's a notice of non-responsibility. That's interesting that it's brought up here. If you own a property and someone does work on it, you're responsible to pay them.
right.
So there's a famous case in business law. You own a property, you go on vacation, and a pool builder comes to your property while you're on vacation, and they dig a pool and they build it. You come back from vacation and you now have a pool on your property that you never ordered. You have to pay for it.
What?
Yes,
But if you come into my property and build a pool,
correct. You have to pay for it.
even if I didn't authorize it,
Correct.
That's insane.
It's insane.
Do they put a mechanics lien on it?
Yeah, it's insane.
Wow.
But you bet you're benefiting from it. Yes.
doesn't have to sign an agreement that I,
No, now, because it happened on your property. If you have a tenant that is doing work on your property and they don't pay the contractor, you have to pay.
yeah.
Unless you have this form called NNR, Notice of Non-Responsibility. If you have a tenant that let's say you have a office building
Yeah.
or a warehouse,
Right.
and your tenant is gonna be hiring people to come work there,
Right,
you as the owner need to put this notice of non-responsibility on the front door
Oh,
that says, I, the owner, am not responsible for anyone coming to do work today. And you take a picture of it, and that will relieve you from the responsibility to pay.
Even if you hire people that are not insured or.
This will relieve you from mechanics liens being filed against you. So if you're going on vacation for a while, just put a notice of non-responsibility on the front door, right? And take a picture of it
put at the door,
on the door, just notice of non-responsibility. Anyone doing work here, I'm not responsible for. And
somebody come into the gardening or.
this is law. This is the law. This is the law.
Just if someone's gonna come make a pool in front of my backyard, I'm sure they're gonna.
It's a famous case that they,
Safer if I put that notice.
you can't benefit, and the law will protect the worker.
JJ is not trespassing.
Just need to get a picture.
It's your responsibility as the
Timestamp.
property to not allow people on your property.
When you are not home, he comes in and
It's
he,
a mistake. It was an honest mistake. They knocked on the wrong door. And you weren't there to stop them, but it's your
It's an
responsibility.
actual case. Wow.
only in America.
Yep.
Okay, time period. All right, buyer may. This is the craziest paragraph, I think, in the whole contract.
Which one?
If you're gonna back out on your deal, this is it, paragraph 14. Buyer may, within the time specified in BL3, request that the seller make repairs or take any other action. Request for repair, form request for repair. So remember, your buyer's doing inspections now, and they're gonna ask the seller request for repair. It says that the buyer request that the seller make repairs or take any other action regarding the property. And then it says, seller has no obligation to agree or to even to respond to the buyer's request. What a crazy sentence.
They can ask.
The buyer can ask, and the seller has no responsibility to even answer.
Why even write this?
Even write it. I guess it needs to be written. If the seller does not agree or does not respond, buyer is not contractually entitled to have the repairs or other requests made and may only cancel based on the contingencies of this agreement. Okay? The buyer is allowed to ask for things, the seller doesn't have to agree. So this is the trade-off. The seller is being asked to give a credit or a price reduction in exchange for the buyer continuing to move forward and remove contingencies, right? That's the seller wants to keep the buyer in the deal. They want to close escrow and get paid. The buyer is basically saying, there's some hazards here that I want to get fixed. I want you to pay for those hazards. And the seller is saying, if I agree to fix that, will you agree to remove your contingencies and close this deal? The buyer says yes. That's the contract.
So if the buyer, as ridiculous as it is, whatever he puts together, and the seller refuses, at that point, the buyer could just walk away.
So, yeah, and that's up to the seller. Do they want to try to keep their buyer? All right. Continuation of contingency. Here's the paragraph that talks about the contingencies have to be removed in writing. Okay. Continuation of contingency 14E4. Even after the end of the time specified in the contingency time, whatever time that is, and before the seller cancels, if at all, the buyer retains the right in writing to either remove the remaining contingency or cancel this agreement based on a remaining contingency. So this says the buyer retains the right in writing. So that means if the buyer has a 12-day contingency and it's day 13, 14, 15, 16, day 29, on day 29, the day before close of escrow, if they have not removed their contingency, they can still back out and get all their money back. Because it wasn't removed in writing. The buyer has to sign on the form contingency removal. I, buyer, hereby remove my contingency. Okay, that's going to be the loan contingency, appraisal contingency, inspection contingency. So the buyer, so again, you're telling your buyers you don't have any risk going into this contract because you have these contingencies. You have your loan, your appraisal, and your inspection. Right? Those are there to protect you. You can back out at any time and not lose your deposit. Once you remove them, then your deposit will be at risk. And you have to remove them in writing. The passage of time does not automatically remove them. Okay, now, when does the seller have a right to cancel? Only first after giving the buyer a notice to perform. So that's it. You have to get a notice to perform. When can the notice to perform be given? If the deposit wasn't made, or if the funds weren't good when deposited. There can be a notice to perform to return disclosures. Remember that the person signing the contract has to give their information to escrow that they're authorized to sign. If it's a trust, who's the authorized signer? So that has to be given. When can a buyer cancel? A buyer's right to cancel. Well, a buyer can cancel anytime that they've removed. A buyer can cancel at any time as long as they have contingencies. But a buyer can also demand things from the seller. So they have to give a notice to a seller to perform. What does the seller have to do? They have to give all their disclosure, right? They have to sign a granting. Anyways, the buyer may cancel this agreement by good faith exercise of any buyer contingency or otherwise agreed, as long as that contingency has not already been removed. All right. The notice form. So we're at the top of.
Can they just say we don't want to know without giving a good,
Yes. Well, you have to give a reason, and but don't give a specific reason. If you're going to cancel a deal, don't give a specific reason. Base it on paragraph 14. And that way, if there's any dispute from the seller,
Mhm.
there can be a million reasons why the buyer backed. If the buyer gives a specific reason for backing out, that could be used against them because the seller may be able to correct that issue. Right? And then they'll have to buy it.
Oh, good.
But if they don't say anything, they don't respond, they don't perform, sign off contingencies. 'Cause I've heard that happening with my friend, he's selling a house.
Okay.
And the date of contingency sign off came up and they didn't sign,
Okay. And the deal closed.
and then they said,
Yeah, the deal closed.
they didn't respond.
So what happened was the deal closed. However, the buyer could have backed out and gotten all their money back up until the day of closing. So the seller just took the risk.
but either way, buyers taking the earnest money back, right? Even if they don't respond.
Yes, if the buyer has not signed contingency removal,
Mhm.
they can back out and get their money back.
And not give a reason, they can just,
Well, they have to give a reason, but I would give a reason based upon the paragraph. So the contingent, the cancellation form says the buyer is canceling based upon paragraph number blank. Instead of giving an actual reason, I would just put the paragraph number.
okay.
All right, okay, so the notice to perform, let's talk real quick about that. The notice to perform shall be in writing and it's gonna get signed. And it'll give the other party at least 2 days after delivery. It may not be delivered any earlier than 2 days prior to the scheduled performance date. That's what I was saying. If you have 12-day contingency, you can give it on day 10. Because it has to give the other party, right? It can't be delivered any earlier than 2 days prior to the performance day. So that would be day 10, it's 12-day contingency. And it has to give the other party at least 2 days after delivery. All right. If a notice to buyer to perform or a notice to seller to perform is incorrectly delivered, so it's delivered 3 days earlier, right? Or specifies a time less than the agreed time. So let's say on the notice to perform, you're giving them, you can give them 3 days or 4 days to perform. You don't have to give 2, just put 2 by default. You can give them 3 days to perform or 4 days to perform. But if you check 1 day, if you check the box and put 1, right? The notice shall be deemed invalid and void. However, if the notice is for multiple items, this is a new thing in the contract. If the notice is for multiple items, the notice shall be valid for all contingencies and contractual actions for which the delivery of notice is within the time permitted in the agreement and void as to the others. This is a brand new language in the purchase contract. Basically, it's saying if your inspection contingency is due, but not your loan and appraisal yet, there's still 5 or 6 days left on that. If I give you a notice to perform to remove all contingencies, it's not automatically void.
Because you
It's not automatically void. You still need to remove your inspection. It's just not, it's void. It's not binding on the loan and appraisal, but it is binding on the inspection.
You can remove individual contingency. It is
Yes,
change.
yes, but this is saying that if it's for multiple items, it's only going to apply to the ones that are in the time effect.
This time of time.
That's interesting language that they added there. All right, now, if someone is not closing escrow on time, that's not a notice to perform. If escrow needs to close, this is a different document. It's called a demand to close. It's not a notice to perform, it's called a demand to close escrow. And it's gonna be signed by the buyer or seller, giving the other party like 3 days. So let's talk about a situation real quick. The buyer removed all contingencies. They need to close Friday. Okay, today's Thursday. They need to close tomorrow. They've removed all contingencies and it doesn't look like they're closing. And your seller is saying to you, I get to keep their deposit. Okay. Everything has to be done in good faith. We don't like to keep deposits, but all right, your seller now is looking at a deposit. We're gonna now give a demand to close escrow. So we have to act in good faith. So what does good faith mean? It means that let tomorrow pass, right? We didn't close Friday. Okay, now we're in next week. Monday, Tuesday, nothing's happening. Now we give a demand to close escrow on Tuesday. So we gave them an extra 2 days. And that gives them 3 days. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we don't close next week on Friday. And then we wait till Tuesday the following week and cancel. Now the seller has definitely acted in good faith and is entitled to the deposit. Now, that being said, nothing happens without a fight, okay? Nothing's automatic. It's not like the seller is automatically getting this deposit. Okay. If the seller goes and puts their property back on the market and sells it to another buyer at the same price or more, there's no damages. What did we call it? Liquidated damages.
The buyer gets the deposit
The
back.
buyer could get the deposit back because there were no
A lot of
damages.
times that will happen, like if the
So,
lender's not ready or you're having issues, that's where the hiccup is.
so a lot of times the seller's thinking they're gonna get that deposit and then they're gonna go sell their property again to another buyer. That deposit is not automatically theirs. Now, if the seller doesn't put their property back on the market, they might get to keep that deposit.
But even if they do, they lost time. Wouldn't that
They
be-
lost time, but they didn't have time damages. Yeah, now you're gonna get into a dispute. I unfortunately actually had it a few months ago where the buyer removed all contingencies and voluntarily wanted to back out. Why? Because they were panicked. It was a condo building and they were panicked about leaks from other units in the building. And they were coming from another building that had leaks. And that really freaked them out. They thought it was gonna be okay. They decided they would rather lose their money than get into that situation. So I negotiated for them only to lose half their deposit and not the full.
Isn't it?
Unfortunately, but they didn't lose the whole deposit.
You could have just not responded to.
No,
You
no, no.
know the
I mean,
person.
they
You'll have
did,
to sign though to get the
They
money
sign,
out, so.
we did a mutual agreement to release
Yeah.
that deposit, mutual cancellation.
Isn't it a change of the condition like happened to me on the other deal that 2 days before of escrow, the rain came in and they started leaking. Everything was leak on the floor, everything came down. The condition was changed, we were able to back out.
Buyer,
Because,
that's interesting.
yeah, that's, I mean,
The seller has to give the property in the same condition as when it was accepted.
yes, so you still have to back out. If the condition change, it's good, yeah.
Now we're talking to an attorney.
No, I called the car and it's
Okay,
based on Article 14.
yeah,
You can back out. Happened,
yeah,
happened 2 times to me.
yes. Seller has to give the property in the same condition as when.
Yeah, yes, yes.
Let's get through this. We have just a limited time left. Okay. Demand to close escrow, so that's 3 days. That gives 3 days. Okay. Now, here's an issue that I want to show. Here's not an issue. Here's a sentence I want to show you in the contract. A party may be subject to a civil penalty of up to $1,000 for refusal to sign cancellation instructions if no good faith dispute exists. So Recently, I had someone text me and they're saying we're in a deal, we canceled. The seller is not releasing my buyer's deposit. Seller's pissed, right? The buyer canceled, wants their money back. And the seller is not in any rush to sign the escrow instructions to give the money back, right? The seller's fighting them. You wasted my time. Now you,
Wasting yours.
right? Okay. So I said, tell the listing agent that your buyer is going to take the seller to small claims court for $1,000 according to paragraph 14H.
Oh.
And then I think that got resolved pretty quickly.
Sure.
All right. Repairs shall be completed prior to final verification of condition. So if you asked the seller to do repairs on your request for repair and they agreed, don't forget your buyer has 5 days before close to come back to the property and see that the repairs were done. So the repairs shall be completed prior to final verification of condition. Repairs may be performed by the seller or through others. The seller shall obtain invoices and paid receipts for repairs performed by others. Prepare a written statement indicating that they were performed. And provide copies of the invoices and paid receipts for the buyer. So if I have an inspection report and the inspector is telling me that in the attic that there are some exposed wires, like the boxes didn't have covers on them, I'm not climbing up into the attic at the end, right before closing, to verify that the seller agreed that the seller made those repairs. The seller needs to show me proof of it. It's up to the seller, right? So I might put in my request for repair if the seller, so I don't want the seller ever to make repairs, honestly. I would rather a credit and have the buyer do it. But sometimes you're in a situation where it's a flipper and they have a crew and they don't want to give a credit. They want to do the repairs. Ask me for the repairs, I'll make the repairs because that's their crew. So in that situation, when you do the request for repair and ask for the repairs, ask also for pictures of the repairs after they're complete. If the seller agrees to take pictures of all the repairs, that's all. Okay, almost done. Almost done. Copy of this agreement, including any counter offers, shall be delivered to escrow holder within 3 days. So don't forget, you might write an offer and all that comes back to you is the counter offer. You don't have a full agreement yet. You need to, the seller still needs to go back and sign and initial every page of the original offer. So this is saying that has to be done within 3 days. That information needs to get to the lender ASAP. All right, assignment. This is a big one now. Remember I was talking about wholesalers yesterday? Buyer shall have the right to assign all of the buyer's interest in this agreement to the buyer's own trust or any wholly owned entity of the buyer that is in existence at the time of such assignment. Otherwise, buyer shall not assign any or all parts of interest without having first obtained the separate written consent of the seller to a specified assignee. Such consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. I want to talk about unreasonably. Prior to any assignment, buyer shall disclose to seller the name of the assignee and the amount of any monetary consideration between the buyer and the assignee. Buyer shall provide assignee with all documents related to this agreement. Okay. If assignee is a wholly owned entity or trust of the buyer, that assignee does not need to re-sign all the stuff. Okay, so what this is saying is that the buyer is allowed to put the property in their own trust or their own LLC, no problem. If they want to assign it to a third party, there's going to be a form called Assignment of Agreement Addendum, the AAA, Assignment of Agreement Addendum. That's going to go to the seller and it's going to tell the seller if the buyer is making money on this transfer. Okay, the seller has to agree. Now, that agreement cannot be unreasonably withheld. What is unreasonably withheld? I would say if there are contingencies, that's unreasonable. If I'm going to agree to allow my buyer to assign the property to a third party and make a profit, that's going to be done with no contingencies. So I want buyer number one to remove contingencies. And then they can assign the agreement non-contingent to buyer number two. And buyer number two needs to sign everything, right? So that's what I think is reasonable. whenever you have the word unreasonable in law, that is up to interpretation of what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. So that's AOAA is that form, assignment of agreement attempt. Okay. Agreement means this document. Richard, do you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. Agreement means this document and any other counteroffer, okay. Just make sure that you get a completed agreement. You know, the first thing that escrow does is when you open escrow is they start requesting documents. Give us a copy of everything. That's because you don't actually have an agreement till everything gets signed. Okay, so yay, we have an accepted offer. You better have the full offer executed. Okay, we would need a full agreement. Okay, counting days, this just talks about how days are counted. First day after an event is day 1. So if we have an acceptance today, today's day 0, tomorrow's day 1. So just making that really clear. Performance must be completed ending at 11:59 p.m. on the last day for performance. So that means if I have to remove my contingency today, I have until 11:59 p.m. tonight. This is how days are counted. If the scheduled performance day for any act lands on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, it automatically gets pushed to the next day. So if close of escrow lands on a Sunday, on a Saturday or Sunday, it automatically gets pushed to Monday. Don't let anyone else try to push it back to Friday, right? If it lands on a Saturday or Sunday, it gets pushed to Monday. If Monday's a legal holiday, it gets pushed to Tuesday. All right. Day or days means calendar days. However, delivery of deposit is based on business days. The only thing that's business days in this entire contract is the deposit. Everything else is calendar days. Okay. Yeah, we already talked about liquidated damages and arbitration. Those two parts require initial by both parties. Mediation, again, the parties agree to mediate any dispute. Mediation is not binding. For there's a dispute, we're going to try to mediate it. All right, we are now at the end. The buyer is going to sign. If it's an entity buyer, you'll fill this out. That means that your buyer is buying trust. If there's a lender, they're probably not going to be buying in a trust. They'll be buying it as individuals and then assigning it to the trust. But you'll deal with that in escrow. If the entity is a seller, you will check this box. And then you'll put the names of the trustees here that are authorized to sign. You'll put the name of the trust down here. And again, the names of the sellers down here. You're going to sign your name here. This will all be done through DocuSign, don't worry. And then we have the disclosures, buyer investigation. Okay, here's one thing. It's called possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. This is just giving your buyer. It's telling them these events can all occur. There are multiple buyers, there are multiple sellers. There's a possibility of dual agency, right? So it's just telling them that. And it's also, John, you asked me if you could, if I'm allowed to tell the buyer how much the other offers for.
Yeah.
Okay. Here it says offers are not necessarily confidential. So agents can discuss anything they want. I'm a listing agent.
They should have,
If I have an offer for $1 million and you call me and say, JJ, do you have any offers? I can say, yes, John, I have an offer for $1 million from Clark Kent. And these are all the terms of the offer. I can tell you everything.
can I ask you to show it to me or just, well,
You can ask me, absolutely, not confidential.
oh,
Now,
that's in you?
as a negotiation strategy, I'm not going to do that.
Oh,
Right? I'm going to tell you I have an extremely strong offer.
Has it always been like that? Or it's just, people always assume you're not
It-
to,
no, wait.
for the,
So when you say has always, I'm thinking 20 years ago.
that's a, I'm thinking it's about, yeah, it's 10, 15 years ago. Always hush hush, like they didn't want to, they wouldn't divulge.
So I do believe that there has never been confidentiality. And there's not confidentiality unless a form called confidentiality agreement is signed by all parties. Because when you don't have confidentiality, it opens everyone up to lawsuit. And I think that this is just making it really clear. Offers are not confidential. So Buyer is advised that seller or listing agent may disclose the existence, terms, or conditions of buyer's offer unless all parties and their agent have signed a written confidentiality agreement. So if I'm gonna write an offer from Angelina Jolie, and she says to me, JJ, I don't want anyone to know that I'm buying this property. I need to first, not with my offer, because no one's agreed to it yet. I need to first take a confidentiality agreement, and I'm gonna go to the listing agent and say, I have a high profile client that doesn't want anyone to know. Would your seller be okay signing a confidentiality agreement before I present my buyer's offer? Then I need to have the listing agent sign it, the listing broker, escrow, title, our broker, right? Everyone that's involved in this transaction is gonna have to sign this. But you know what's gonna happen is TMZ is gonna be advertising tomorrow, okay? But, you know, all we can do is try. If you really wanna have a totally confidential deal, that could be done through a blind trust. And that's something to have your client inquire to their attorney about, a blind trust. If you really want to try to have a full anonymous, get it. Okay, fair housing, we can't discriminate. Buyer insurance advisory, this is a new form that came out in June. This is a big one for California.
We have to attach all these forms?
It's automatically bundled. When you go into PAR and you click residential purchase agreement, these are all bundled. Buyer homeowners insurance. So get your buyer immediately to apply for homeowners insurance. Wire fraud, tell your buyer before they wire their money to escrow to call escrow and verify the account number and the routing number. They need to do that.
Can you show to the guy that they say that he's an old man, he doesn't know how to wire? Can you go to the bank with him and wire the escrow company that I'm an old man, I don't know what?
Yeah, I'm gonna help my client. I am gonna help my client, but I'm gonna make sure, you know, I don't wanna have liability. I need to really make sure that the account number and account number.
Money and everything.
So,
You could
so here's what I want to do. Like, I want to text my client the phone number to my escrow officer and say, you know, I'm gonna call my client over the phone. I just texted you the number to my escrow officer. Does it match the email you're looking at?
Right.
Right? Call the escrow officer at that phone number and verify the account number and routing number. So I'm just trying to make sure. So here's what happens. There are hackers that hack the email account of escrow. They get access to the username and password of the escrow's email. If I have access to escrow's email, I can see emails that come in from agents that say, I have a new escrow. And then I am now going to send an email from escrow with my account information, right? Pretending I'm an escrow. No one knows any better, right? So that is really happening. So a lot of times when you see escrows sending out documents, it'll be from a secured server where they need to verify who they are, right? They need to download, everything is done through secure servers. So anyways, wire fraud is a real thing. Just make sure your buyer knows for sure. They verify over the phone with the escrow officer, the account number and the routing number. There is an agent in this office whose father lost $500,000 2 years ago.
Sending fraud, sent to the wrong account.
Wiring to the wrong account.
Wow.
Escrow company was.
No, not failure. But it happened before they joined this office. All right. This is the document, the seller's payment for buyer's broker compensation. This is the last paper on our. Remember at the beginning of our offer, the top of page 2, the very beginning, we are checking this box. Seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer. So we checked this box, and this is the form that got added to our transaction. Seller's payment for buyer broker's compensation. So we signed a buyer broker agreement with our buyer for 2.5% or whatever, however much we did. And we are going to be asking, the buyer is now asking the seller to cover that amount. So this is where it's done.
That's the seller to pay to the agent.
So when the listing agent took the listing,
Right,
the seller agreed to pay the listing agent fee,
right,
not the buyer's agent fee.
right.
This is new.
The new law.
This is the new way.
Yeah,
The only thing that was discussed at the listing appointment was the listing agent's fee.
right.
And the listing agent probably told their seller, expect every single offer that comes in is gonna ask you to pay the buyer side commission.
Right,
We're not gonna negotiate that now,
right.
but just expect that every offer that comes is gonna ask you to pay. Just know that.
Yeah, so going forward, when you list a property now, 'cause it's a new law, you don't put down the compensation for
For the buyer,
you don't put that anymore. So it's not there, it's
No.
removed.
3 months.
So basically, if I go to a listing appointment, I'm basically negotiating my own commission. It's 2.5%, 3%, and that's it. The rest, inform them that it's probably gonna come back as paid in
From your seller,
interest.
expect every offer that comes to you to ask you to pay their side.
Got it.
Well, whenever I call an agent, they're so sure that their seller is paying for commission for the buyers. Is there no, like,
There is,
I was supposed to
there is.
trust their word for this?
You,
Offer?
so. Do you trust their word? Your buyer is including in the offer the request. Okay, so let's,
They also want to trust and they want to say, okay, I'm putting it just because there's paperwork, but I don't want to pay.
okay, fine.
I want seller to pay this.
So let's say the seller gives you, the seller is ready to accept your deal at $1 million. No commission. They don't agree to pay the commission. Right? And you're ready to make this deal at $1 million. Everyone agrees. $1 million, no commission, right?
Okay.
Okay, now at the last second, you're gonna now have a final counter offer that says 1,025,000 and includes commission. Now the buyer is able to finance that 2.5%.
Still coming out of the buyer's.
Yeah, we're allowing the buyer to finance it. Because the buyer has to pay it. How are they gonna pay it?
But this
Right,
doesn't do
that's-
that, right?
So we're gonna ask
It's
for
a deposit, but they don't have the commission.
we're gonna ask the final counter offer to include the commission. It makes no difference to the seller. The seller pays income tax based upon their net proceeds. So it makes no difference. If the seller sells for 25,000 more, but has a debit for 25,000 because of commissions, it makes no difference. They're only paying income tax on their net.
Are you seeing more of that? Or are you seeing more of,
I'm seeing more of sellers agreeing to pay.
okay, as it, no, it's always been for the next
I'm
last.
seeing more business.
That's what I-
The only thing I am seeing a little is 2%. That sellers are pushing back a little on that 2%. But this, again, this is a negotiation.
Right.
And just ask the other agent to please, or fight back a little bit, fight back, ask for the 2.5.
So there's the option, either buyer finances your commission. Or
Yes.
seller agrees to pay, and
Yes.
it's as if buyer's paying the listing price, nothing is coming out of their pocket, like, it's still they're paying, I understand, but they don't technically pay the commission from their pocket.
Right, so
So it seems like seller is paying, but you're still getting paid from the earnest money.
you're getting paid out of all the money that the buyer is putting into escrow.
Yeah.
All money comes from the
Earnest.
buyer. All money has always come from the buyer. Right? Where's the money come from in a purchase? Comes from the buyer. So it used to be that the seller would pay maybe just as an example, 5%. It's still coming from the buyer, the 5%. Even now it's still coming from the buyer, right? Because the seller it's still all, the money has always come from the buyer.
Right.
No matter what, it's still coming from the buyer. It's always come from the buyer.
The seller has the equity in the property, but the money's coming from the buyer.
Always. It always has.
I have a question. and we'll
Yes.
ask that. So you said $1 million, then $1,025,000. 25,000, it's basically the seller's giving them a credit then at that point because he's
What I'm saying is.
that's a bit within the loan.
You write it off for $1 million.
Uh-huh.
And you're asking, and the buyer is asking the seller to pay the 2.5% commission.
Uh-huh.
And the seller says, no, I'll accept your $1 million and not pay the buyer side commission.
Okay.
Now you're gonna counter back or you're gonna say to the agent gives you a counter that says 1 million, no commission paid on the buyer side. You should call the listing agent back and say, can you please include my commission and give me a new counter for 1,025,000?
Has to fit within the loan parameters.
Because it's the same as to the seller, it doesn't matter,
Right.
right?
Got it.
Because the buyer needs to finance the money.
At this point, buyer, you extend your buyer, that additional 25 is gonna go through as my commission, because seller is not willing to pay, so technically it's coming out of your pocket and you're financing it.
But the money's always coming from the buyer.
Yeah, but they wanna, you always say that, it doesn't.
Because it is, money is always over the buyer. That's the problem.
But they are looking at the little amount of money that they're
Right,
finding.
I'm gonna change the way that they're looking.
Yeah,
You're not
My-
convincing me, I can't convince my buyers.
I,
you gotta paint the picture.
a lot of times in the past, I've had buyers come in to my office with agents that refuse to sign something and they always sign. I always get them to sign, don't worry. No, because
I take your word
I
on
always get them to sign, don't worry, they'll sign. If someone's not signing something. I don't know, I don't put up.
But now their mortgage now increases, right?
They're-
They pay 'em
yeah, but they have to pay you anyways, because you had a buyer representation agreement. Either they're gonna pay you cash out of their pocket, or they're gonna finance it, which would they rather do?
But they won't come and tell you, hey, but we talked to the listing agent said that. I mean,
If they're going direct to the listing agent,
and then a buyer will ask me, you talked to the listing agent and they said that they were gonna pay the commission.
yeah,
Then what happened? Why am I the one who's paying at the end?
so the buyer signs a buyer rep agreement, they've already in advance agreed to pay the commission. The buyer has,
Hoping that the listing agent told us that seller is willing to pay.
okay,
That's why they're signing that,
okay, fine.
because at the end, they don't think that they're.
So
gonna pay.
in the end, everything's a negotiation. And the buyer can decide whether they want to do it or not.
So in the offer, you can put that in the offer then.
Yeah, we put, this is attached.
Yeah, right. It's in the offer. So so it's in writing in the very beginning.
You're writing the meeting. So here, it says seller's payment to buyer's broker. Seller agrees to pay buyer's broker 2.5% of the purchase
Yeah.
price. Okay,
Okay,
maximum
Anything, everything has to be writing. Verbal,
seller shall only be obligated to pay the buyer's broker the lesser of the amount buyer is obligated to pay pursuant to their buyer rep agreement. If you have a buyer rep agreement that only says 1%,
you can.
that's the maximum you can get. Okay. If there is no buyer rep agreement, seller has no obligation to pay buyer's broker. You have to have a buyer rep agreement. You have to have it. And yes. We're done. Yes,
JJ,
We're done.
final
We're
question.
done.
can I ask something?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask one question? Okay.
Here, I was thinking that, like the phrase in the brackets, like amount below should be what is on the BRBC. I thought that we had the flexibility, like I understand that there is a maximum limit that we have to put on the BRBC. For example, if I put 3% and my buyer signs that, I thought that I would go with any percentage here below 3, but it looks like this has to be equal to the amount that we agreed with the buyer.
Okay, so this right here is are my notes.
I
And
know,
wrote-
no.
No, but I'm answering your concern. It says I wrote here amount below should be what is on the RBC. I can easily change this to say amount below should be what is on or less than the BRBC.
Okay,
So you can definitely ask for less, but you can't ask for more.
okay. And
I'm assuming agents want to ask for more.
all right. And when I'm talking to my buyers, what I was thinking is I tell them, look, I will write 3% on the BRBC, but if they don't pay you, then the only amount that I will be asking from you is 2%. I will not go above that. If you
That's a
have,
verbal handshake?
like, yeah, it's a verbal handshake. Is it illegal?
Okay. Is it legal?
Is it? I don't know.
It's verbal.
Okay, then they would say, make it in written. So because I don't want them to, like, I want to make sure that if the other side pays 3, okay, they won't have to pay me anything. But if they have to pay me, then I will not go about 2%, for example. Does it make sense, or is it
So you're asking your buyer to sign a high amount on the buyer rep agreement to give you the opportunity to ask for a high amount from the seller, right?
Yes.
Great.
And if the seller says, no, I'm not paying anything and I'm not going to be increasing the purchase price, then
Okay,
my buyer will say, okay, I don't want to pay you more than 2%.
okay.
So that part is very confusing for me.
Nothing should be confusing.
They take 2%.
Your buyer is going to be liable for what is signed on the BRBC.
Mhm.
If you're willing to take less than what's on the BRBC, then that's okay. Just, include Michael Rosales in that decision,
Okay.
right? Because the BRBC is signed, everything you sign is with the broker, not you.
Oh, all right. Yeah. Mhm.
You're authorized to sign, but you have a verbal agreement now that the broker is not involved in. So just make sure that everyone at the brokerage is on board,
Okay, I get it. I get it.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Any other questions? There was someone else on
Uh,
board?
I have one. Hello, hi.
Okay. Hi.
Just a quick finished thought, I guess, about what you were saying. If you request the listing agent and the counter offer to include your commission if the buyer's not willing to pay, is that means that the loan amount will have to be higher to include that, right? Like 2% or whatever else, because otherwise they will be short and then they will have to pay cash. So you will have to figure it out to get a property that is just a little under, in case you have to go back on the counter and include your commission.
So buyer can obviously only qualify for what they can qualify for, right? I just want to show you something on the buyer rep agreement. So you're gonna sign this buyer rep agreement with your buyer and you're gonna put an amount of compensation in here, right? Your buyer. There's also a checkbox down here. It says buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay. Right? Crazy. But this
Same agreement.
is the buyer rep agreement saying they will pay you 2.5, but they don't have the money. But this allows you to ask the seller to pay. Why? Because you have the right to back out. You have a get out of jail free card here. Here, for a transaction, this agreement is contingent upon seller or others or both agreeing to pay broker the full amount that a buyer is contractually obligated to pay. This contingency is in favor of the broker. Broker may elect to cancel this agreement related to representation. The seller does not agree to pay the full amount that buyer is contractually obligated to pay broker. You got that? The broker has
Yeah.
the broker has the ability to back out and say, I'm not getting paid and I'm not working for free.
So it cancels.
Only the agent has the permission to back out.
But you know what I mean? Like the loan amount, when you, for example, the house is 1 million and you get approved for 800 and then the 20% down, then it will have to have that extra money to pay.
Correct.
Just as a backup. That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. It will
Right.
have to include that extra money just in case.
Correct. I mean, if that's all they can get, if that's all they're approved for, and the lender can't get any more out, it's gonna have to include your commission. And if it can't, there's no deal. Right?
Right.
You're not
Okay.
gonna be able to stay in the deal for free.
So
So
buyer,
here is your permission to back out.
The buyer loses the
The
deal.
buyer gets the deal. You're just not involved in the
The buyer
transaction.
gets the deal.
Buyer gets the deal.
So we get really.
Yeah.
still don't pay the commission though, but they're just not approved for that amount of loan because they're tapped out already.
But because this is brand new, this is all brand new.
It's kind of scary, actually.
So
You,
I see that happen.
they say, okay, but I can't get a loan for more.
if basically National Association of Realtors in the settlement said, we're separating commissions. Commissions are no longer being paid broker to broker. They're gonna get paid from buyers and sellers, not broker to broker. Because of this, there could be a situation where a buyer's agent may end up not getting paid, and we don't want to create a situation for a buyer's agent where they're working for free.
Right.
So this paragraph says that if the buyer's agent is not getting paid in full, they have the right to not do the deal. The buyer's agent has the right to back out. This is our protection clause right here.
But the deal is still go through.
If the seller does not agree to pay the full amount that buyer is contractually obligated to pay,
Yeah,
right? Right? Broker may elect to cancel this agreement related to representation
What's gonna,
on that specific, on this property. So
Oh.
the broker has the right to back out on this particular deal if the seller didn't agree to pay the buyer's obligations.
So then basically the buyers, he loses the property.
The buyer list property, this only removes.
Then who's representing him at that point?
They'll be
And they can move forward
they can move forward
by them without representation.
by representation.
so you find
At the
the
mercy of
deal with
the,
everything,
Wow.
at the end they go and buy you.
So that's.
Wow, that's gonna be a mess on the road.
We're not seeing this nightmare occur.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Like I see it.
Let's
down the
go,
road.
let's go. We're still in the brand new phase of this,
Yeah.
right? So if this becomes an issue, it will get corrected, right? Let's just see what happens. Right now, sellers are paying from what I'm seeing.
The program is there.
We haven't, I am not reading about pushback. You would be reading a lot in the news about pushback if there was pushback. Things are pretty much going as they were, business as usual. The only thing I'm seeing is sellers may push back a little on the commission, maybe only wanting to pay 2 instead of 2.5, 2 1/4. But again, it's a negotiation and you should be fighting. Okay. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's scary.
Yes.